Okay, we are now live. This is Dive into World Building, and I am your interim host, Gilson, filling in for Juliette Wade while she's in France. And today's topic is teachers, and we'll see how long we can keep this going. Hopefully, a few people will join us. Fingers crossed. This was kind of exactly what I was afraid would happen.
We'll see how it goes.
When I volunteered for this, I'm like, no one's going to come, and sure enough. But maybe we'll get Brian back next week for libraries. Anyway, so I wrote down a big list of different kinds of teachers. Tutors, religious teachers, free, paid, public school, private school, traveling teachers, university, and higher and lower education. And teachers show up in my work a lot because I write middle grade, although they are more sort of background characters. They do show up and are present, normally because a lot of my stuff takes place in school. Not all of it, though. But I thought this would be a really interesting topic because, I mean, teachers do show up in fiction, in genre. And I wrote down, like, the traveling teachers. That actually came from a Terry Pratchett novel. I think it was the second, might have been, it was either the first or second of the We Free Men, Tiffany Aching series, and there's a sort of a little like a market day in town, and Tiffany goes into town and she pays a teacher, a traveling teacher, for a single lesson. You can pay by lesson, and so she pays for a lesson, a few pennies or whatever it was, and I thought that was so interesting to have like traveling teachers who you could pay by lesson for like something you didn't know and needed to know, and just sort of pay by interest. And then also, if you think about it, any character of yours apprenticing to anything will have a teacher. Governesses, private tutors. I think the one that doesn't squeak into genre as much is, say, religious teachers. And for some reason, for that, all I picture is, like, you know, someone sitting under a tree, like Buddha, and you go and you talk to them about religion. And then the idea of free versus paid, I think because there was free once upon a time, I'm going to say Greece. You know, the old philosophers would just sit out there in the town square and everybody could go and listen. Maybe they had a school you could go to. Maybe not.
Yeah. I think one of the reasons that religious teachers, by which you mean teachers of religion, might not show up in genres because religion doesn't show up much, except as background or sometimes as the bad guys.
Yeah.
In you know, or the monks who are either you know, the bad guys or the vague good people, but people like rabbis. Rabbis are teachers. That's what it is. That's what it means. They're not quite the same. as they're not quite the equivalent of a priest. They just take that role, do that function. Um, but their primary purpose is to teach, um, historically anyway, even though they function as the head of the congregations. They lead services, but they're not required. Our rabbi goes away all the time and is uh, other people lead services, and they know what they're doing. Um, so that may be one of the reasons that they don't show up. And I don't know that other nuns, I guess, can function as teachers, but I don't know that there's another faith that has a function that is primarily teacher. But I don't want to get derailed into religion with teachers in religion specifically.
But I do think that would be an interesting one to throw in.
Yeah.
At some point, somebody somewhere.
Now the free, the free versus paid is probably one of the trickier questions, because what does that mean? Free for whom? I mean, I don't pay teachers directly. I pay taxes as far as the free public education goes that my kid had growing up. I pay taxes for it, and I pay taxes for the kids who are still paying for that, and the teachers get paid. The people who don't pay for it at all are the students, who are minors anyway.
Right.
And that's in our current system. I pay the college, and that pays the teachers and pays for everything else. But my kid is lucky enough that they don't have to pay the teachers or the college or anybody else. But that is just the education thing. And they're taking driving lessons now. So that's another kind of instructor. So, with apprenticeships, you mentioned subjects that are not reading, writing, and arithmetic, or history, or what is generally considered to be, I guess, book learning. And I guess teacher covers that too.
Yeah, I would say so.
My driving teacher or my driving instructor.
Yeah. Well, that's because it's interesting because like if there is a difference between teacher and instructor, I would say no. I would say they're pretty synonymous, although it's like not everyone is going to cover everything either.
Yeah. I think terms like instructor and professor and may have differences in hierarchy within an institution.
Yeah.
Professor, associate professor, instructor. But I don't think I've ever heard of a specific college teaching position that is actually called teacher. They hire instructors, they hire professors, they hire assistant and associate and adjunct professors. But I don't think they hire teachers.
No, there's a difference. If you are a college professor, it generally means you have a master's degree or higher. Someone without a master's degree or higher, hypothetically cannot teach in college or university. Um, so you may have a 4-year teaching degree, but that's aimed at teaching to, grade school, high school, etc. And that's sort of the cutoff point um, for those. Um, that's interesting because, like, okay, teacher training is another issue where, like, I think the idea that you had to have a 4-year teaching degree or a certificate um, is relatively new. Um, I read Jude the Obscure, and his cousin is going to. It's only like it's like a 1 or 2 year training course. Um, After which she'll be, um, well, she can be a teacher. Um, so it's like it didn't have like it wasn't like some big higher education thing. It was just this thing you could get after a year or two, and then you could go teach school to school children.
Yeah, and that's a thing that doesn't come up in fiction mostly in genre. That you need to be trained to do a particular thing,
Yeah,
to teach a particular thing, unless
yeah,
you are um, a craftsperson or an artist. You have to be, you're expected to be a master jeweler in order
right.
to teach or have an apprentice learning jewelry from you.
Yeah,
But you don't become a master jeweler in order to teach jewelry making. You
no,
become a master jeweler because you want to be a jeweler.
yeah,
Um, and I think classroom teaching is something that is historically, and now I'm just making this up as I go along because I haven't studied education. Is classroom teaching as a profession, as a goal, is not. I I want to say it's relatively new in terms of past few hundred years. Um, where you say, I want to teach, I want to go into a classroom and help people learn things, rather than I know this thing and people come to me to learn it, but this is not what the point of my learning these things was. I wanted to know these things. So, what I think you've had um, in the past, and in probably fantasy more than science fiction, um, is scholars who know stuff. They
yeah,
just they love to learn, and they're the ones who are stereotypically covered in books in the library, and I actually have one of those. I have one of those,
nice.
resident scholar, and then she's, they gave her a room in the house because she has a cottage where the other um, professional staff, there are a bunch of cottages, but
Hmm.
she will forget to go there. She will fall asleep in the library, and her boss finally said, look, here's her room in the house. Stop sleeping on the books. If you can't get all the way to your cottage, just go down the hall. Here's a bed. Fall over. Okay? That doesn't get used much either. But
Yeah,
as a resident scholar, she has access to this budget for books. And one of the responsibilities is to teach her boss's kids.
hmm,
And that is, her goal wasn't, I want to teach my boss's kids. I want to have access to all of this stuff, all of these books,
yeah,
and I can't have it unless I do this. Well, she likes teaching, but there are some people who, um, they can't stay holed up in the ivory tower because they're not useful there. And that's the thing
Yeah.
about free is really there isn't anything that is free, just
No.
physically, because even if it doesn't involve money, even if you have, say,
Mhm.
a monastery that is
Mhm.
self-sufficient because they fish and they garden and they hunt or whatever,
Right.
they are paying for their ability to stay isolated and to study their manuscripts by putting in the labor to provide themselves with simple things like, food, shelter, clothing,
Yeah.
because it's just physics and biology. And even if you leave money out of it, there's no such thing as free.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's like I believe there was something where like I want to say this was kind of pioneer days in the West where your town would bring in a teacher and the teacher might not have had a house. So the teacher would take turns staying at people's houses, maybe until they could build a house or something attached to the school. Or not attached, but just adjacent. So I thought that was an interesting idea of like where your teacher is genuinely part of the community, sees the kids outside school, um, stays in people's homes. And obviously they would get paid, but there would be like sort of you'd be getting free room and board.
Yeah. And part of the thing about that is, oh, Kate can't today, just got a message.
Oh, darn.
Um, hang on. Okay. So sorry. Sorry, posterity. And that's a situation where the teachers actually genuinely appreciated enough that the need is understood enough and accepted, that
Mhm.
so that people will provide um, a residence and food, and necessities so that this person can do that. Uh,
Mhm.
and we seem to be losing the understanding that it's an important thing. Um, it's And I don't know if that's because, if that has anything to do in some people's minds with the idea that teaching as a specific profession is, that there's something wrong with that. I don't know, or maybe teaching as a specific profession is
I
dismissed as valuable because people don't value education.
Yeah, it's
Get
I
derailed.
think it's going to vary from place to place how respected your teachers are. It seems like something that should be a very, very respectable position, no matter where you go, but it's not. Um, because some of it is like how much do you value education in general? Um, how much do you care if your kids have to go to work at 9? You're not going to care as much. Um, but if they're at home all the time, you got to do something with them. Uh, well, I think that's interesting because I think there's also sort of does the state educate or promote the education of your children, or is it entirely up to you and your resources and your time to educate your children? So here we have, like in America, you can go to public school, or not. But it's generally, it's like you have to, like there's like you can go to public school or you can go to private school.
But you
But
are
you generally
required.
you have to go to school.
Yeah.
Or homeschool, right? So it's like you have to be educated in some form or another, and that's required.
Yeah.
This is not a requirement everywhere in the world.
Yeah. Oh,
Kate!
Kate!
Hey.
Did I guilt you? Did I guilt you, honey?
Slightly, yes. That's okay.
So no, I'm not sorry.
Well, I can't let this happen with just two of you.
Thank you. So teachers, we're talking about. Jay was just pointing out that it's not a requirement everywhere that people take a certain amount of education the way it is for the moment in the United States.
Yep.
No.
So it's
and the quality varies widely. Some people only go up to 8th grade. It really depends on your ability.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see a lot of disabled kids in Africa, period, and the ones that I did see tended to not be in school. So think about that in terms of what kind of world if you're looking at a feudal world, who's going to be there as your pupils, as well as your teachers? And also, what do you think is worth teaching?
Yeah. Because there is no, in my world, there's no what's the word I'm looking for? Disdain, I guess, for Mishar's sister. Mishar is the kid who is teaching because that's how he gets to go become a scholar.
Mm-hmm.
He gets paid, and his boss said, if you get this job done, if you can teach my son to read, I will pay for your entrance fee to go to the college and become a scholar. His sister is a jeweler and is going off to apprentice to a jeweler to become an even better jeweler. And in my idealistic world, in some ways, there's nothing there's nobody saying that one of these ambitions is better than the other.
Right.
Though, of course, there are probably some who say, well, scholars are more important or better in some way. And then there are going to be other people who say, well, jewelers are more important because they're producing a tangible thing. And then there are some people who are going to say that neither of these things is useful because they're not producing food or shelter.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because, like, okay, I think one of the backbone of teaching and why you have teachers is literacy. Literacy and mathematics seem to be like the core issues that it's deemed people need to have. And like with literacy, you can move up in life.
Specifically arithmetic.
Yeah. So without those, if you are just learning a craft or a trade, it may not be illiterate, or you may have limited, like you may just know your numbers and your weights. But it may not need a lot of reading. I think you could apprentice to a blacksmith and be illiterate your whole life, and it would not matter.
So
Well, it wouldn't unless you needed to do bookkeeping.
yeah.
That's true.
You know,
So
that's
anybody,
that sort of thing. Like if you watch the beginning, or I don't even know where it is in Pillars of the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
The kid like sneaks down to go look at the book of the calculus that the foreman has left, so that he can figure out how to do these things. But it didn't necessarily teach him how to read. It just taught him how to calculate, weights and angles and stone weight and that sort of thing. It makes me wonder what, like, okay, I can see where we're looking at like a fantasy or feudal background sort of look. What does that look like in the future? You know, do we still have the Dirty Hands BSG episode where, you know, you become whatever your father was? Or do we have an educational system, or do we not? And that has its own repercussions.
Yeah.
I think there's a focus. I mean, this is probably, I don't know about age old, but the question, why do we have to learn this stuff? What good is it that we learn this stuff? Why? And the focus just keeps getting more and more on, you're learning this so you can get a job, so you can support yourself.
Right.
And if that sort of says, okay, so why then do I need to learn history? Why do I need to learn science if I'm not going to be a scientist? Why do I have to learn these other things? And with a focus on being able to support yourself, as that gets stronger, as people insist that you be a productive member of society, then education that involves things that do not support a productive job is going to be less supported.
Yeah, I mean, look at how arts are funded or not. But I guess there's like, okay, in the future, there's a couple of things I wanted to hit on. There's that sort of joke around the internet of, is everyone in the Star Wars universe illiterate because you never see them reading anything? I thought that was really interesting, kind of funny. Whereas like in Star Trek, everybody's, you know, reading off their little iPads. You know, so it's like, you know, they have books and everything, even though they have all these entertainments and stuff. And then the other thing is, I think how education is conducted might change more than there not being an education. Although I can definitely see there could be potentially, like, especially if you're on if you're on like a generation ship or something, there's only going to be like these X jobs, you know, X kind of jobs that need filling. You know, and so they're trying to find like, well, we need some engineers. So you 5, you're going to be engineers whether you like it or not. Kind of situation where it's like there are these sort of functional need jobs that have to be filled or the spaceship crashes and dies.
In which case, he would probably also have population controls. And the easiest way to say you 5 are going to be engineers, there are 2 ways to do that. One is your parents are engineers, so you're going to be an engineer. You and your sibling, who are replacements, are going to be engineers. And the other would be to say, okay, you're 5 or 10 or whatever, so we're going to do the aptitude thing, and
O levels,
you know, you're going to swap around and figure out who's best suited for that. That's tricky though, because you know, you might not get the highest, you might not end up with all of the engineers you need. You might get 10 people who are suitable to be engineers and you only need 5. And so those 5 are suitable to be engineers. So you still need.
Yeah.
And what does that say? You know, which ones do you put off to do something else.
And often teachers are like an actual part of the winnowing process because they're the ones who are administering the tests. And so they actually have a pretty big effect on who becomes what.
Yeah, like your teachers can recommend you for things if they see a special aptitude. And that also works in the reverse, is if your teacher is somehow jealous or doesn't like you, they can stick you with like, black marks on your permanent record.
Mm-hmm.
And
you don't get to be in the AP course, so you aren't going to go to be an engineer. So get used to washing socks, kiddo. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was my review today. Yay!
Yeah. So,
oh God.
Administer the test, but the teachers are not always the ones who either design or require the tests.
No, that's true.
No. And that's actually an interesting thing, because I just had the hard science, soft science discussion, and it was an interesting discussion. And so who actually does do that is a really good question. In my world, in medicine, we have like ethicists and stuff make this stuff up. But how many ethicists do you have in your spaceship? And are they like the gym teacher? Do they also teach math?
And maybe you should. Maybe you should have an ethicist in your spaceship. Maybe
I think so.
Critical.
Wow.
Especially when your topic at I guess it was at Ad Astra, are generation ships unethical, which is a whole other thing. Had a thought, gone now.
Okay. I have a gen ship thought. Is that something that people don't really take into account very often? Is that, okay, you have a generation ship. So you have a couple of generations where you are just staffing the ship. Fine. And then you have about 20 years to prepare for landfall. And so all of a sudden you have to teach yourself or your children all of these skills that you never had and didn't know how to use.
I think the solution to that would be sort of virtual reality VR classrooms with VR teachers, and it may just be sort of a pre-programmed AI that would take you through all these, that could teach all the steps, and it may or may not be great. You're like a wonky one. But I think that's sort of like the change in education would be like remote teaching, virtual, like actual virtual teacher that's not a human being and never was, but maybe looks like it in VR. And then there's the sort of wish that, you can just sit in a chair and something, will come down over your head. And like by osmosis, you'll know everything you need to.
Which has never worked.
Right? Like
no.
They can just download all the knowledge into your brain, and like, yay, I speak 10 languages now. Without effort.
I think that's actually a really good point insofar as talking about authors talking about teaching. Oddly enough, as many of us have English degrees, a lot of us don't teach.
No.
And it's a skill in and of itself. And my son, when he was in college, he was like, why do we have to go to lecture? I hate lecture. It's so boring. I'm taking notes. Oh my God. And I said, it's only been about 2,000 years. So if we really thought that we were going to come up with something better than having a person stand in the room and lecture at people, I think we would have gotten there.
The point to having a lecturer instead of a VI is that the lecturer can field your questions as they come and can respond to them. And in theory. The boring part is when you get lecturers who can't or won't do that.
Yes.
And
won't
if you
is a challenge.
Yeah, if you go to an AI instead of a VI, then you're just you could get the same thing, but why when you could have a human? But then in a generation ship, if you using the VI system, the VR system for teaching things that you need at landfall. I was going to say that that works if you know which 20 years, if you have a specific schedule and you're confident that you're going to make it, that you're going to be able to start in time, or that you'll have those 20 years and that you won't be educating people to do landfall things and then not making landfall for another generation. And another possibility is to teach those skills all along and hand them down, but then you get people who are learning about putting up buildings, and they're going through why do we have to learn this stuff?
When am I ever going to use this?
When am I ever going to build a house?
Great grandkids might want to know this, but and with those things specifically, building and planting, things that require physical skills, like knowing how to plant things. How do you put a seed in the ground? That's not book learning. You can read about it and you can learn all of you could read the instructions, but if you can't practice it, then it's not worth nearly as much. This is why they have internship programs for engineering.
You could say the same thing about surgeons.
Yeah. Well,
that's why we have residency.
Right. But surgeons, medical personnel on a ship, because you're going to need medical care all along. So you have an opportunity to practice that. But that is where VR would be useful, is to say, okay, here's the lecture part that you're getting all along that you don't understand why you're doing this. And your lab, as it were, is VR, where you learn the muscle memory.
VR farm, though. You could VR farm.
Yeah.
Farm game. You have to turn everything into a video game, and there you go.
Yeah. Holodecks, if you've got the power for it in the room.
Right.
You could do holodeck, which I guess is basically a form of VR.
Yeah, the good Star Trek's VR. But that's interesting, as
so
because there are going to be like portions where knowledge is lost because something is not taught anymore.
Or whatever thing that is going to come in and disturb your voyage, because we're writers and that's what happens. Wiped out those memory banks.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of stuff that can happen. I mean, who infected your AI with a virus before you left? There's all sorts of stuff that could go on, and all of a sudden our biobanks are all gone. And what do we do? And we didn't stock the ship with porn, so we're kind of stuck. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think it's really interesting that I'm not sure I'm okay, as a teacher formerly, I'm not really sure I'm totally willing to give VR the stage. Because I know that I had all sorts of online tools and I could go and do worksheets and blah, blah, blah. And until I had like 2 people standing there coaching me through it, there were some pieces of stats I just was not going to get on my own.
Yeah. But I believe there have been studies that say children learn better from a fellow human being than they do from a computer.
Part of that might be that if you have a human being teaching you something, it means that it's important to human beings.
Mm. Also, the human might have 4 or 5 different ways to describe this.
And this is a thing in how people are taught to teach. You know, some people are taught to teach, you know, this is what you do. You have to know that people learn in different ways, that you have to have different methods for teaching different students, that they won't all learn the same way. And you have to know that that's a valid thing, that people aren't better or worse because they are better at learning things by reading than by hearing. That they need to look at things in a different way. That doesn't make them stupid or smart.
And those are actually relatively new concepts too, because a lot of, I think, you know, going back to like 1800s style of teaching, a lot of it, I think, was simply rote memorization. Where you had to memorize the math, you had to memorize the spellings, you had to memorize, you know, it was just memorization. And people assumed that everybody would learn the same way, or everybody basically had to, or if you didn't, you were like a problem kid and tossed out, maybe, you know, or you were just like the worst kid in school and you didn't get past, you know, whatever benchmark, and you quit at 16 to go get a job.
Yeah.
So like it's sort of been, there's been like a sort of, as research and brain development and child development has happened, these new things have come out in teaching. But then it's like, but then there's also like things regress as well, because you know, everybody, like that Common Core thing, who everybody hates and nobody knows how to do, and everything gets made fun of and stuff. And like, even I still don't. And I like asked my mom about it, and she's like, the problem is that people don't know how to teach Common Core. So you have a bunch of teachers who don't know how to teach Common Core, trying to teach Common Core. And then like the ways of teaching also get handed down, at least here, by the state in a lot of ways. There was, by the time my mom quit, they had like their whole day was planned, like every single classroom had to be teaching the exact same thing at the exact same time of day in the exact same way. And it was just awful and everybody hated it. But now you have a generation of teachers who's learned to do that one way and who don't know how to teach without a script, because that was how they were taught to teach.
Which is kind of
yeah, so it's like, so there are fads in education just like there are fads in everything else.
And they're sort of cyclical.
Yeah.
But one thing that I think I haven't seen explicitly taught in terms of how do you teach, you know, teaching people to teach, is how do you deal with that question, why do we have to learn this? I mean, I've now actually Bob came up with my math professor. Obviously I had more than one math professor, but though my favorite math professor came up with an answer, and I wish I could remember what it was. It was a long time ago. But he actually came up with a satisfactory answer as to why we were sitting there learning these things. But it took a beat. And I don't think I've ever heard, certainly not an elementary school or high school teacher, give an adequate explanation, and certainly not without stumbling around the question of why are we learning this stuff?
I do have an answer for that. And it's mostly down to exposure. How do you know you don't want to be a mathematician until you take math? How do you know you don't want to be a biologist until you take biology? It's you need the exposure, and then hypothetically just general knowledge so that you can inform yourself later.
Well, that's actually the problem right there with the concept of we only are doing education so that you can have a job. It's like that's the absolute opposite of a liberal arts education.
And it's totally not absolute opposite of a leisure society.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We're supposed to be doing better in some way than our ancestors who had to, fight tooth and claw for every bite.
And work 18 hours a day.
Yeah, but you know what? We're still doing that. What are we getting? People in the US anyway, people who aren't at work are considered to be doing something, by a lot of people are considered to be doing something that is non-essential.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're taking a vacation? Seriously? Why are you? What? No, I haven't had a vacation in 3 years. Look at me. I rock. I am awesome. I am a productive member of society, and I am so much better than you.
Oh yeah, you hear that from people who are off on their, they have a day off in the middle of the week. They're like, what are all these other people doing here? Don't they have jobs?
Well, that is interesting because, like, if we ever sort of move into a system where where it's like if automation takes over everything and all of a sudden we find that there's nothing but leisure, one of the ways to fill that leisure is pursuit of knowledge for the pleasure of it. And I think that is kind of a foreign concept to a lot of people. Because there's the joke about the perpetual college student who, is like 40 something and never graduated, but just keeps taking classes and switching majors. But that's not a job. That's a joke.
But it's a scholar.
Yeah,
we're looking at scholars.
Because
to begin with, we were talking about scholars and how that is a thing that you used to be able to be in some probably Greek society. But again, making this stuff up as I go along because I haven't read about that in a long time. And it's not valued. So you have to go and be a perpetual college student and weasel your way into these classes because it's not respectable.
Wait, I have a plug. My alma mater, the College of St. Catherine, actually allows women, because it's a women's school, to come back to school and study without getting credit, but they can attend classes and audit them. They don't have to take tests. Once I think they are 60 or older, could be 65. And so you can just go learn whatever it is you want at that point.
Awesome.
Yeah, it is.
That's
how I got one of my classes. The age range in my class of my students was from 19 to 72. And the discussions we had were amazing. So yes, that is something we do not have a place for in society. I think we absolutely need it, especially as we look at automation taking over more and more stuff. We are going to have to actually put together a society that values knowledge for its own sake, not because it gets you a job.
And values people who don't have jobs, people who can't have jobs.
Yeah.
Well, now that's just crazy talk. No, I think you're right, though.
I know.
No, you're absolutely right. And if we can value people who don't have jobs, then we can value people who have jobs that we don't necessarily think are important. But, if you don't have those sewer workers. If you don't have the McDonald's worker, you're not getting your Happy Meal, and when you go into the bathroom, you're not going to be real happy there.
Yep.
And we don't value those either. And there's a lot of stuff that we value, but we don't pay for.
Mm-hmm.
Coming back to teaching again.
Yeah.
Because we don't pay teachers nearly enough, and yet we pay stockbrokers who do basically nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Inordinate amounts of money.
Yep.
And so, what?
Oh, there's a really good Key and Peele sketch about if teachers were treated like NFL players. And I believe all the Key and Peele sketches are up on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
They put them all up there. And it's really worth it because they're covering it like sportscasters covering the NFL draft.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of amazing.
Completely off topic. If you go back and watch Weird Al's White and Nerdy, the two brothers in the convertible at the very beginning are Key and Peele.
Huh.
Oh my God! No, wow.
Yeah.
So, tutors, because I know we haven't talked about tutors much as a specific subset of teachers.
Yeah. But they are definitely a thing. I would say tutors are, you have to pay them privately.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them are teachers or former teachers or have specialized education or knowledge that you're paying for. Like I took private art lessons throughout high school to get extra art lessons. So that was sort of a form of tutoring. And then a lot of tutoring is just to enhance your grades, I think now. But I think once upon a time, tutoring could be your child's sole education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and usually by subject, you'd be a French tutor or, whatever.
It's also something now that high school and college kids will do to make a few extra bucks because they are better at or a year ahead of the people they're teaching.
Mm-hmm.
There's also peer tutoring where you can get the A math kid will help out the C math kids.
Mm-hmm.
And you just meet up in the library and the school sets it up for you.
Yeah. And some colleges have paying positions where if you show up at the peer tutoring center and actually have people come and you help them, then you make a couple of extra bucks, and which is nice because you can buy a book maybe, or but I don't know if that is I guess in some ways it's more respected because I don't know if that's more respected than being a classroom teacher or not. I guess it depends on who you're talking to. But that's the position that my character Mishar has, is to be a tutor to his boss's kids. So he's got the same job as the resident scholar. They're both responsible for teaching this kid. Mishar's going to be leaving as soon as the job is done so that he can go away and be a scholar somewhere else. But he is a tutor and not a scholar. And I'm not sure exactly, well, it probably has to do with age and experience and education.
Yeah, I would say if you're going to set up like a tutoring system for your world, you would want to sort of explicitly like what separates them from a teacher. Obviously, like if public school doesn't exist in your world, then tutor is a good kind of go-to description of that job. they may or they obviously, I think they would have to have some kind of training that would qualify them. They'd have to be literate. They'd have to have a certain amount of math, and they'd have to be able to get your kid ready to go to whatever higher education or job ready, depending on what you've hired them for.
Mm-hmm.
To know what the system is, so you can make the exceptions. Because Mashar is an exception. He's basically almost finished with the public school. He's the same age as his student, actually a few months younger. But he's not learning disabled. And his student is. And his student's father is flat out desperate to find somebody who will at least stick with the kid. And saying, if you stick with this kid, I will pay for you to go to this other place, is his way of trying something else besides, this is your job and I will pay for your food and your shelter and you know, a stipend if you just do your job. But to know what the system, the basic system is, there is a public education system, that this kid is not in it because he's the son of the ruler. Yeah, to know what that system is so that you can find the edge conditions and the exceptions is well, it's a thing for pretty much anything. Teaching is more complicated than people necessarily think it is.
Yes.
So.
Yes. Teaching is hard. is I think a good place to end on that. It doesn't necessarily have to be. But thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you, Morgan, for helping me carry this until Kate could join us.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Kate, for coming. Next week, same time, 10 a.m. Wednesday, will be libraries.
Ooh.
Which I love to death.
And you guys have to do a great job on this, because I am going to watch it, because I can't be here. I'm so sorry.
I know. I know. I'm like, oh, fingers crossed. Brian knows things. So fingers crossed for Brian. So next week is libraries, and maybe we'll get like libraries part 2 with Juliet once she's back. And I have Morgan. I have your topic suggestions from last week as well. So I'm gonna email her with all our. This is what happened, and here's the links, and here's our suggestions, and so she's gonna have a whole thing to do on her Patreon when she gets back, and then maybe we can do part 2s of some of these with more people, and some different angles. So I'm going to stop the broadcast now. Oh, wait, okay. And if anybody watches this, I'm going to post this on Facebook. So anybody out there who hasn't received the invite is coming from my YouTube, which is Book Brats with a Z. You may or may not get it. Check your spam folders, check your social folders, and then especially just check my Facebook or your friend's Facebook, as the case may be, for the link. All right, bye-bye.